Welcome to today's Explainer. If you've ever felt completely drained by office politics, frustrated by a stubborn colleague, or just caught in the middle of unnecessary family drama, well, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're breaking down some incredibly profound source material on the science of interpersonal persuasion. But to be clear, we aren't talking about manipulation or cheap tricks here. We're talking about building what the author calls a tough self, a resilient mind that can naturally navigate friction, command respect, and quietly persuade absolutely anyone, from a junior employee all the way up to your most intimidating boss.
Okay, let's dive right into this inside-out journey. We'll be looking at Section 1, the foundation, which is all about internal control. Then, Section 2, the strategy of distance. And finally, Section 3, the art of managing up.
So let's kick things off with Section 1, the foundation, internal control. You see, before we can even think about changing someone else's mind, we really have to look in the mirror. True persuasion always begins with mastering ourselves.
There's this fundamental, almost stoic truth drawn straight from our source material today. You have got to recognize what is actually within your power. When it comes to human relations, there's a very hard line between what you can absolutely control and what you literally have no say over.
Let's break that down a bit. You have complete control over your own willingness to learn, your attitude, and your own emotions, right? But on the flip side, you have absolutely zero control over other people's feelings, how they react, or the established age hierarchies where you work. And honestly, friction explodes the second we try to force control over those external factors instead of just focusing purely on our own internal posture.
So the crucial point here is that the ultimate thing existing totally outside your control is another person's emotional state. Because of that, governing your own emotions, this concept of strict self-control, or chikotoge, is really the only reliable tool you've got in any conflict. It's the absolute bedrock of building a tough self.
Which brings us to this incredibly powerful definition from the text. What does persuasiveness actually look like? Well, it's the honest, humble starting point of possessing the willingness to learn from absolutely anyone, regardless of their status or age. True influence isn't about, talking over people or proving you're the smartest person in the room. It's about adopting a genuinely receptive posture. When you have that honest desire to learn from others, even those you totally disagree with, you are laying the groundwork for real persuasion.
Moving right along to Section 2, the strategy of distance in general relations. Now we're projecting outward, focusing on our peer-to-peer dynamics.
To survive and really thrive in any workplace, you absolutely have to acknowledge differences in standpoints. And doing this requires a universal adjustment principle. Simply put, deliberately adjusting the emotional and physical distance between yourself and others is exactly what makes human relations run smoothly.
Let's look at the spectrum of this distance, which the text refers to as acuity. As humans, we kind of have a terrible habit of going to extremes, don't we? Step 1 shows what happens with people we like. We pull them entirely too close, and that leads to enmeshment, blurred boundaries, and eventually, friction. Step 3 shows our reaction to people we dislike. We push them entirely too far away, creating total separation and a complete breakdown in communication. What we constantly need to strive for is Step 2, the sweet spot, maintaining an appropriate, measured distance regardless of our personal feelings. Our source material provides a wonderfully relatable example of this, using family dynamics, specifically a mother-in-law and a daughter-in-law. If a mother-in-law steps directly into the absolute closest space of her son and daughter-in-law's relationship to state her opinions, well, it doesn't solve anything, it just causes a total war. However, if she views them as a separate entity and takes just a slight step back, she maintains the peace. That deliberate retreat, that spacing, is the actual key to harmony.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core rule of everyday interactions. Friction happens when structural distance breaks down. Whether you're navigating a super tense office environment or a complex family gathering, managing this structural distance, basically refusing to get too enmeshed and refusing to completely isolate, is absolutely your best defense against unnecessary drama.
All right, that brings us to Section 3, managing up, the art of persuading superiors.
Let me pose this question to you. Think about that stubborn boss, that senior manager, or maybe an older family member you've really struggled with. How do you successfully persuade someone who has more authority, more years on the planet, and a lot more experience than you do?
If your immediate answer is by using bulletproof logic, well, the source material has a bit of a reality check for you. Pure logic usually fails completely against a seniority-based hierarchy. Instead, the text introduces a much more effective tool, the concept of kawaii-ji, which translates to a kind of charm, lovability, or endearing humility. To move as superior, you have to understand the power of becoming a charming, receptive person.
The psychology behind this is fascinatingly simple. Think of it as a secret way to hack a hierarchy. If you approach a superior with a rebellious, cheeky, know-it-all attitude, their defenses shoot right up and they will use their authority to shut you down. But if you possess this kawaii-ja, if you're humble and endearing, older, more experienced individuals will naturally want to pull you up. You literally elicit their innate desire to help and mentor you.
So how do we actually operationalize this? The text outlines some very specific, actionable tactics to move as superior. First, absolutely do not act arrogant. Second, allow them to really understand your character over time. Third, adopt a defensive or receptive posture. It's kind of like the martial art of judo. You don't meet their force with a rigid attack. You absorb their momentum, show vulnerability, and just let them speak. And fourth, intentionally make them feel relied upon.
Let's see how this builds our actual influence. The truth is, people open their hearts to those who want to learn. When you ask a superior for their wisdom, when you make that older person feel genuinely relied upon, they completely drop their guard. They feel validated. And once they feel validated, they will happily turn around and listen to your perspective. You have officially opened the door to persuasion.
Which brings us to this phenomenal quote from the text that summarizes this entire strategy. Ultimately, when persuading an older person, taking a step down to achieve your desired goal is what matters. You're essentially choosing to lose the immediate trivial ego battle in order to win the overarching war of persuasion. This ability to intentionally lower yourself, to utilize charm and distance rather than brute force, well, that's the ultimate hallmark of having built a truly tough self. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Think right now about the most difficult relationship in your life. Are you aggressively fighting them on their turf? Or are you ready to apply jikotage for self-control, manage the kyori or distance, utilize a little kawaii or charm, and take a step back to learn? The science of persuasion really is in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.